Λοιπόν, καλησπέρα σας κυρίες και κύριοι, αγαπητοί φίλοι, συνάδελφοι και φοιτητές. Είμαι η Bonna Wescoat, διευθύντρια της Αμερικανικής Σχολής Κλασικών Σπουδών στην Αθήνα και είναι χαρά μου να σας καλωσορίζω εδώ απόψε για το συμπόσιο με τίτλο «Τρεις διαστάτες εμπειρίας αρχαίων περιλαμβάνοντων». I didn't do that right. Περιβαλλόντων, συγγνώμη. Το οποίο συνδιοργανώθηκε από την Αμερικανική Σχολή και το Κολέγιο Τεκτών και Επιστημών του Πανεπιστημίου Case Western Reserve. Καλωσορίζομαι επίσης όσους από εσάς μας παρακολουθούν διαδικτυακά. Τώρα στα αγγλικά. Good evening and welcome. I'm Bonna Wescoat, Director of the American School of Classical Studies, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here this evening for the symposium, Three-Dimensional Experiences of Ancient Environments, co-sponsored by the American School of Classical Studies and the College of Arts and Sciences of Case Western Reserve University. We also welcome all of those who are following us online. Now, the symposium is part of the exhibition Imagining Samothrace from Homer to the HoloLens, which is on view at the Macriani Swing from now until June 29th. So please come often. Now, the field of virtual reality and 3D modeling is a rapidly developing field. In fact, so rapid that the title of our exhibition, Homer to the HoloLens, is now out of date. And the team from Case Western Reserve will instead be using X-Real technology and glasses. So just, again, a sense of how, again, rapidly things are moving. But I take this opportunity to thank my colleague Maggie Popkin of Case Western Reserve for taking the lead in organizing this symposium, and to the team from the Interactive Commons of Case Western for their work on the mixed reality presentation of the Sanctuary of the Great Gods on Samothrace that we will have the opportunity to experience. I also would like to thank the team at Emory University's Center for Digital Scholarship for their dedication in building and expanding and migrating the Samothracian model over its many generations. Now, this international symposium features 6 cutting-edge papers, works in virtual technologies that are reshaping the ways we think about and experience ancient and medieval places. They are transforming our access to the past in ways that offer opportunity to shape new experiences in the present. And we are very glad to welcome the major innovators in this field who have agreed to share their work with us in the next 2 days. In addition to the guided tour and virtual reconstruction of the Sanctuary of the Great Gods in its heyday, the several innovative projects include exploring audio vision, the combined experience of chant and image at Hosios Lukas, using new modeling tools in the reconstruction of the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, teaching with mixed reality reconstruction of the Red Monastery in Sohag, Egypt, using eye tracking to reconstruct viewers' perceptions in the House of the Greek Epigrams at Pompeii, and using scanning technologies to virtually reconstruct ancient sculpture on Samothrace, and exploring movement and trade in Rome and Greece through 3D environment multi-agent simulation. Our program is complex, and because we are interweaving presentations with discussion, video, and demonstration, as well as an exhibition. So our goal is for everyone to be able to hear the talks, participate in the discussion, experience the mixed reality model, watch the videos on icons of sound and seeing through chant, and visit the exhibition. These opportunities are set out in the program, which I hope you all got one of, it tells you when different things are happening, and on the back there is also a map showing you where to go for those who are not so familiar with the two sides of the street. Now, for the mixed reality demonstration, we'll be using the lowest level of the Blagan Library, and we'll be entering it from the back door of the library, so down near the Wiener Lab. And we will have people in shifts of 12 can go at a time. And so we'll be sending people down in the course of this evening. Those of you especially who can't be here tomorrow should take advantage of this opportunity this evening. But we do have 2 other sessions tomorrow, so don't despair if you don't have an opportunity tonight. The exhibition will also be open until 9 p.m., and then again tomorrow between noon and 6 p.m., so there's opportunities there. Now, as always, I remain indebted to the staff of the American School for all of the work that they have done to make both the exhibition and this symposium a success. They give 150%, and we are the very fortunate beneficiaries of that effort. So the papers this evening are centered on the spatial modeling of the Sanctuary of the Great Gods on Samothrace, with emphasis on embodied experience and the way in which 3D modeling and extended reality technology help to bridge our understanding of sacred experience in this remarkable place. The first paper happens to be given by me and my colleague Ian Burr of Emory University's Center for Digital Scholarship. So we start the program basically at the beginning with the paper, Making a Digital 3D Platform for the Sanctuary of the Great Gods on Samothrace. So I would like to again, once again, thank the many people who've worked on this model over the years from Emory University's Center for Digital Scholarship. They've been our long-term partner in these initiatives. So, the island of Samothrace lies in the northeastern Aegean off the coast of Thrace. Its windswept shores rise dramatically to the peak of Mount Fengari, where, according to Homer, Poseidon sat to watch the Trojan War. In antiquity, the island's claim to fame was its mystery cult of the Theoi Megaloi, or the great gods, whose secret rites of initiation promised salvation in times of need, particularly at sea, and according to Diodorus, the opportunity, quote, to become a better and more pious person in all ways than one had been before. The attraction of these promises is easy to understand, and the cult, which was open to all, regardless of wealth, gender, class, or ethnicity, drew prospective initiates from around the Eastern Mediterranean. The Sanctuary of the Great Gods itself has the unmistakable aura of sacred space. It is simultaneously vast and intimate. Set on the north side of the island, facing the sea in the cleft at the base of a mile-high mountain, this place physically integrates the divine forces of earth, sky, and sea that played a fundamental role in the sacred rites known as the Mysteria, taken from the name of the initiates, who are known as Mystes, and from which our English word mystery comes. These sacred rites of initiation were never divulged, so we don't know exactly what went on. However, we can have a purchase on the transformative power of these rites through the comments made by ancient authors, the lists of initiates who left their names in the sanctuary, the innovative architecture that sheltered the rituals, the splendid dedications offered to the gods, and the humble but crucial detritus of cult, pottery, and animal bones that built up over centuries of use, spanning from the 7th century BCE to the 4th century CE. The Sanctuary of the Great Gods thus provides a key point of access into the religious, political, and cultural psyche of the classical world. One underexploited body of evidence that we have concentrated on in our work is the place itself, its physical properties, its materiality, and the intersection of landscape, architecture, and passage, to understand the experience of moving through the initiatory space, and thus to gain a better sense of the experience of sacred space. The sanctuary rose rapidly to prominence in the second half of the 4th century, and it benefited from the largesse of Hellenistic royalty and elites. The sanctuary features some of the most innovative architecture of the Hellenistic period. By the end of the 3rd century, this once rustic temenos had become a dazzling and very densely developed landscape. The topography of the sanctuary is complex. It is a valley with plateaus framed by deep ravines, and it can be difficult to understand. Many of the buildings are no longer standing. The forces of nature have broken the ancient passages and deeply eroded the steep terrain. So modern visitors can't follow along the ancient pathways, and they confront steep drop-offs, as you see that set of tourists in the landscape today. Two-dimensional plans are not very helpful in depicting this incredibly complex topography, as you can see on the left. It communicates to some degree, but not actually the extraordinary extent to which the land is so sculpted by the forces of nature. They're into hills, valleys, and passages. Now, we are not the first to worry about this issue. The excavators from the 1870s, the Austrians, were also concerned with how to understand and reimagine the sanctuary, and show you here their photography, but also a reconstructed view that they made at the end of their work. This is by George Niemann, and it's called an attempt at a reconstruction of the sanctuary, where they capture some of the rustic setting of the mountain of Iosorios behind, but they are positioning themselves from a completely fictitious hillside high above the sanctuary to give you this kind of bird's eye view into it. So while it's meant to be evocative, it's not really very true to experience. In fact, the first team that really focused on creating a three-dimensional experience in the sanctuary were the American team, who excavated there starting in 1938, and in the 1950s completed work on the central building in the sanctuary known as the Huron, and realized that it offered a good opportunity for a partial reconstruction or an anastylosis. And that work that was completed in 1956 really did redefine our spatial understanding of the sanctuary, because it gave the viewer an opportunity to operate around a vertical axis and a point of orientation, so they could begin to understand where they were in the sanctuary. But today, 3D modeling offers an excellent platform for investigating the ancient physical and built environment in a more holistic way. And through animation, it has served as a kinesthetic tool to explore passage and perception. So 3D modeling has become an integral part of our understanding of the sanctuary, and it's allowed us to privilege the landscape and people's kinesthetic experience as fundamental components in the sacredness of the site. And now I turn the mic and the pointer over to Ian, who will explain more about the creation of this model.
Thank you, Bonna. So we have much to cover and not much time, so this will be a bit of a whirlwind tour, but bear with me. 3D modeling has developed rapidly since this project began in 2008. What was once cutting edge now looks more primitive. With each iteration of the model, we've concentrated on a different aspect of it. So we began in 2008 focusing on form in the program Lightwave. In future versions, we moved to 3D Studio Max, and further iterations focused on light, texture in 2016. And while the platform of 3D Studio Max allows for a high level of detail and rich texturing, it does not include support for interactivity, the ability to freely move around the 3D scene. So we began in 2017 experimenting with a game engine platform, Unity 3D, to approach questions of movement, agent-based modeling, and viewshed analysis. And then the third generation of this project, which is immersive mixed reality, is currently being developed by our team members, Maggie Popkin and her colleagues at Case Western Reserve University, who can tell you much more about that soon. But these different platforms offer different paths to have opportunities to investigate and visualize the site for different objectives. So we begin by building the model, and we are going for a very high degree of detail and accuracy. So all of these measurements were actual blocks found in situ, drawn in a CAD plan, and also GIS readings, elevation readings of the site. We recorded every foundation block and natural feature that we were able to. And our team measured and drew the many architectural blocks to reconstruct each building. We used the building footprints along with reconstructed elevation drawings to model the buildings in 3D. And then there's this question of terrain, because terrain really informs the passage through this space, and it was very important for the Sanctuary of the Great Gods to have accurate topographical data. We used two different sources for this, two different resolution meshes. The sanctuary itself is all taken from manual elevation measurements, and the larger island mesh, which you can see in the background of the model, is just taken from satellite terrain, which has a resolution of 10 meters. And then viewing the architecture in context with the topography has helped us to adjust the modern digital terrain to reflect closer to the original topography of the site. And there are some difficulties and limits with this sort of site in making a digital terrain, specifically because it has so many terraces behind and steep hills behind retaining walls. It can't all be one mesh that can be adjusted. It has to be actually cut into many pieces. And finally, texture, color, and landscaping add to the realism of the environment. Just very briefly, we use something called physically based rendering materials to simulate different aspects of light interacting with different surfaces. For patterns on the various architectural elements, we rely on pieces found on site. Our architecture is generally well preserved. However, the paint, of course, these are outdoor structures, the paint is worn off. So for polychromy, for color, we rely on comparison with contemporaneous sites such as the Tomb of the Palmettes. And so in managing this model, it requires handling a large amount of data, detailed 3D models, a high number of unique textures, as well as, of course, large volumes of source material and more every year. And so there are a few ways that we deal with this and make it a little more manageable. All of the buildings and structures are modeled individually and then assembled later into a master scene or main scene, which reduces the load. Reusable tileable textures are used to the extent possible. So, for example, instead of having a different texture on each building, we would have a limestone, a few different varieties of marble, and so on and so forth, and assign those to reduce the number of overall draw calls in the scene. And then for polygon-heavy meshes, things like photogrammetric scans, we do what's called decimating the mesh or optimizing it to reduce the overall number of polygons. And so, let's see. This just shows the model placed in situ compared to the present state. And so this model is used both for research and education, for questions of analysis of sightlines, movement, and processional routes through the sanctuary, to reconstruct the ritual spaces and their interaction with visitors, but also for public engagement, for pedagogy, and increasingly for interactive experiences. And so I'm going to play just a couple of walkthroughs through the sanctuary, which were taken from 3D Studio Max that show the initiate experience entering the sanctuary at night. And we see the intensive shaping of the topography, which enhances the experience of initiation. Entering the sanctuary involves a series of steep descents. The sacred way descends in steep stepped ramps past the rotunda of Arsinoe on the right and into the small triangular area in front of the Ionic Hall of Choral Dancers, which here is where the main rites of initiation likely took place. And we look back at the hall. And next, this is the return out of the sanctuary by daylight. Here we go. So note that during the day you see different things and your body moves in a different way. You are ascending rather than descending, pulling yourself up rather than allowing gravity to pull you down. And we ascend the sacred way back to the theatral circle. And finally exit the sanctuary through the propylon. And we don't have it in this model, but to the left here would be the ancient city walls. A bit more on that later. So, one of the considerations that we have to deal with in making a reconstruction like this is balancing detail with accuracy. We want to try to avoid representing anything that we don't have evidence for. But conversely, the other side of that coin is that the model can help to answer our questions of architectural ambiguity. So for most of the structures in the sanctuary, we had relatively clear archaeological evidence to inform the general building structure. However, for the enclosure that houses the Winged Victory statue, there was some ambiguity to its form. And for the time being, we have represented this by including both a roofed and an unroofed version of the structure in the model. Just a bit of background on this issue. It's been difficult to reimagine the statue back in its original environment, which you are standing in this picture, to understand its visibility across the sanctuary. German scholar Heiner Nell proposed that the Nike was designed to crown the theater and to be seen at the summit of the Koilen. However, French scholar Marianne Hameau, to whom we owe much of our understanding of the statue, thought this was unlikely, and Nell was misled by the position of the Nike at the top of the Darrow staircase in the Louvre. So our model helps to shed some light on this question by showing that indeed it is quite visible as you pass through the sanctuary in the central ravine here. And we're going to just approach up the steps and through the theater. And then just a bit on where we're going now with the model. As I mentioned, these renderings that you saw today were from 3D Studio Max, which is designed for modeling as well as high-quality asynchronous renders. It involves a time-intensive rendering process, and it does not allow exploration of the sanctuary. Whereas we've recently been experimenting with another game engine named Unreal Engine. This enables real-time exploration and walkthroughs. It allows for easier iterative development of the scene because you're able to see finished results instantly rather than waiting for a render. But it does require a bit more performance optimization, which is the trade-off. It also has some built-in tools and plugins for landscape features like flowing water, trees, wind, and weather, which is nice for realism elements. We ended up choosing Unreal Engine over Unity 3D, which I mentioned earlier, which we had used in the past for this kind of final version render quality platform because it has high fidelity graphics, it has a superior lighting system, and it has the ability in mind to handle large scale environments. And then on the horizon for us is expanding the model towards the ancient city with data collected on site. We have new photogrammetric scans of the city walls from outside the propylon, which we can add to Unreal Engine and potentially use as a basis for reconstruction. And then another thing that we are interested in as a future direction is a diachronic model of the sanctuary in different periods over time, which on the left here we have another one of those very early light wave models, which is intended to represent the sanctuary at the time of Philip II, circa 350 BCE. And that's where we're going.
So we'll have all of our discussion at the end. So I just would like to introduce our next speakers. That will be Mark Griswold and Erin Henninger. And their paper will be developing extended reality technology to experience ancient spaces. Mark and Erin.
So I want to thank Bonna and the team here for inviting us to share our work and for all the collaboration over the years. As the title suggests, we're going to talk about our work in developing, if we could get the slides, developing an immersive experience using the models that Ian and Bonna just showed you that will allow you to walk in and around the sanctuary and feel like you're there thousands of years ago. But in order to get there, we have to go through some work. And I want to start with just a philosophical thought that the way we experience ancient places can be very different. We can do our experience through writing. It can be through drawing. We can travel to places and we can take photos and feel like we're in the space as it exists today. Ian just showed you a lot of rendering that you can see on a screen, but what we're going to show you in the demo that we hope you can all come and join is a different type of experience called extended reality, which really, as I said, allows you to feel like you're there in the past. Now, this term extended reality encompasses a lot of different kinds of technologies. Excuse me. You may have heard of virtual reality, where you're excuse me, wearing a headset cut off from the rest of the world. There's also augmented reality, if you've used Pokemon Go on your phone. Thank you, Erin. We do a lot of mixed reality, where we try to blend the digital world with the physical world. So Erin's going to talk us through some of our history on that. Thank you so much.
So more than 10 years ago, Mark and I got our start working in mixed reality, creating our medical anatomy curriculum that we call HoloAnatomy. This was when the Microsoft HoloLens had come out. It was announced in 2015, and our university leadership decided that this was a transformational educational tool. We see it as a communication vehicle, and it was ideal for visualizing the 3D human body in 3 dimensions. So our team created everything required for that classroom, from all of the infrastructure, running the headset, to the human body itself. At that time, no one had studied how students learn in devices like this, and so we had to conduct those studies on our own. And what we found was the students were learning twice as fast compared to the tradition of cadaver-based dissection, and they were retaining that information better. With those positive learning outcomes, we were asked to do even more development of 3D applications for our students. All told, we've developed more than 50 significant applications with hundreds of partners, and I'm going to tell you about a few that are particularly relevant to this audience today. With Paul Iverson in 2019, we developed an experience around the Antikythera mechanism. He wanted his students to understand the scale of this object. So through these glasses, we can look at something that we can't touch. It's typically behind glass in a museum, but we can see its scale, in this case, something akin to a shoebox. And we can understand the tiny inscriptions maybe a little bit better when we can explore those up close, which is what Paul Iverson does. With our collaborator, Betsy Bowman at Case Western Reserve, we visualized her model of the Red Monastery, a 5th century monastery in Egypt that she led the restoration of over many years. At the end of that restoration, they conducted a laser scan of the site so that we could bring it home with us and study it more, and Betsy could share that with her students, and Clara Pinchbeck will share more about that tomorrow. But this allows us to experience a 3D structure in its entirety. We can see this entire architecture. We can look at it from the ground floor, and we can even take a virtual elevator to experience the fine details in the higher levels. And this is something that's very difficult to do in the real world. If we wanted to look at those details as it stands today, we would need to have scaffolding in place. Lastly, I'll spend a couple of moments talking about our exhibit with the Cleveland Museum of Art, which featured a sculpture of Krishna, which we lovingly call the Cleveland Krishna. But in reality, this was a sculpture from Cambodia, which had a fairly complicated provenance, traveling from Cambodia to Brussels and then landing in Cleveland. And it was important to the curators to talk about the complexity of that journey and attempts at restoration over time. And so we were able to transport people back to this sculpture's original site. And that's something that we imagined from the first time we put on an extended reality headset, that ability to take a museum object that's typically in isolation, maybe on a podium behind glass, and restoring it to its original context. So this was a really exciting opportunity to take advantage of technology to do that. So here you see a photo of the actual location in Cambodia. The temple, fortunately, still stands where Krishna was originally positioned. So the museum team was able to take photogrammetry to capture that location, and then we could visualize it in an exhibit. It's significant to note that this 3D experience was totally embedded in the traditional museum experience. So many times these are available as sort of a sideline to the main experience, but here it was central. And you can see there's a fairly significant setup. We had 80 HoloLenses in that experience. Groups of 6 visitors would go through together in a physical exhibit designed specifically for digital overlays to bring this story to life. And so in the next section here, you can see the visitors looking at those physical objects. There's a table, there's crates in the corner, and digital overlays would augment them to transport you through time. And then when you exited the digital experience, you could actually see the museum's sculptures in the gallery. So here's another example of that overlay of the digital with the physical world, which extended reality lends itself so well to. We had this door opening that is the exact dimensions of the cave opening, and then through the headset we can recreate what it would have looked like to come into that cave, and we can cross over the threshold to see Krishna inside. And so this is truly what that experience felt like, with visitors coming in together and viewing what Krishna's worshipers would have seen. And the same here with the cave dimensions. When you come into the cave, you can see Krishna holding up Mount Govardhan. The museum conducts research on all of its exhibits, and we're very proud that this was the highest rated exhibit in the museum's history. 86% of the visitors felt that mixed reality extremely enhanced their understanding of the artwork. 75% said they were extremely likely to participate in future extended reality experiences. And curators who visited from around the globe commented that mixed reality was necessary to fully tell this story.
So I'm going to try to take off from where Erin left it and ask the question, how would you do this and how do we continue to do this? And it's really goes through a number of steps that you would probably go through already designing an exhibit or telling a story. You would ask, who's your audience, and develop that story around the story that you want to tell them. But unlike a traditional exhibit, you have to do something to identify the type of technology that you're going to use. As Bonna said in her introduction, this field is changing so rapidly that you do have to decide on some sort of hardware that you're going to use to render your exhibit on. And it's important to note that if you do develop it on one piece of hardware, it won't necessarily translate to the other ones. We've tried to do some work in that area. But then we have to get our 3D data. It's not enough to just have a photo. You really want to have a scan or some sort of model of the environment that you're going to try to take people to. And because these are computers that you're going to wear on your head or on your face, they're not as powerful as a desktop computer that, Ian showed really beautiful renderings that are done on a desktop. We can't wear those on our face. So we have to make some sort of decisions to make these models run on a computer that's so mobile. And then we have to develop software to do that. As Bonna said, we started with the HoloLens, and Erin described some of our exhibits that we've done on that. As of December, Microsoft, who manufactured the HoloLens, has decided to discontinue this project. But thankfully, there are other options out there, and there's more coming every week. So you may have seen the Meta Quest 3, which is shown there. The Apple Vision Pro is next to that. The piece of hardware that you'll see in the exhibit here is made by a small company called XReal, and they're now starting to look like fashionable sunglasses, and they're pretty easy to wear, and hopefully everybody can experience that. Ian and Bonna showed this beautiful model that they've been working on over the years, and it's just fantastic to look at. But the problem that we had to deal with first was just the amount of detail. They've made this beautiful model to be very, very accurate, but each point, each vertex, vertices, and the polygons cost computational time. And so we have to take the data and take it from a very high detailed model, like shown in the bottom here of this car, and turn it into something that still represents the car, still faithful to the car, but is much lower computational cost. Just to put a number on this, we try to do something on the order of 150 or 200,000 vertices. I think the model right now has 20 million to start, something on that order. So we have artists on staff who had to look at every piece of the model. They spent a lot of time on these rock walls that line the central area, and tried to change the model from many, many points at the top to lower at the bottom that still represent the wall very well, but don't cost as much computationally. There's also a lot of details in the upper areas of the building, the buildings that you can't see from the ground. So we had to go through and optimize the amount of detail that was preserved there to make the experience still accurate, but able to run. There's also objects like the large door in the rotunda area, or in the rotunda, yes, that's on the rotunda, that have a lot of detail and a lot of the metal work that we did some processing to remove and optimize. If you can go through, our team actually did a whole lot of work on the roof tiles to minimize the amount of detail there. It may not be important, but computationally it was a very expensive process. So once we had the model look like it could run on the computer, we then had to do a lot of work to make it feel like you were there. And a big part of this involved, as Ian did in his renderings, deciding on a time of day and deciding on a general appearance for the site. These are more daytime renderings. We played around with a lot, and this isn't an accurate background, but we tried to experiment with different times of day, different characters of the light. And what we decided on, and you'll see in the demonstration, is a sunrise time. It made it feel like it was easy to connect to the site, and it also made it very easy to understand the three-dimensional nature of the site. So when you go and you try the demonstration, I hope that you'll agree that this will feel like sunrise. Next is a technical problem, but we want to do these experiences together. And so we, at CASE, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time in the detail here, but have spent a lot of time developing a networking solution so that we can take lots of these devices and have lots of people go through these experiences together. Erin talked about our Krishna exhibit where we had 80 people going through together. We just recently did a dance performance where we had 100 people working, or 100 people in the audience watching a dance performance. We'll have 6 to 8 devices downstairs, but we could do more. But essentially what we have is a web-based interface that's talking up into Microsoft cloud computing infrastructure that we've built. And it allows you to take different types of headsets, different types of phones, tablets, and synchronize them all together to make sure that everybody's seeing the same thing. So this is one of the classes that Maggie was teaching. It looks like you're just in a regular conference room, but all of these students are actually seeing and feeling as if they're on Samothrace.
So here we've...
So we're just going to show a quick video, since we have a lot of people online and not everybody will necessarily be able to go through the demonstration. Maggie just did a short walkthrough. This is just a 30-second walkthrough that we recorded to give you an idea of what the experience looks like.
So here we've transported ourselves up to the Western Hill, and you can see actually we're looking back here across to the Eastern Hill, to the theatral circle. We're standing right at the top of the theater, looking down the steps of the theater into the central sanctuary where where we just were. You can see the top of the rotunda of Arsinoe's towering over the other buildings of the central sanctuary. The sweep of the stoa over here with its monuments, columns with statues on top of them, statue bases with all these bronze statues, standing figures, equestrian figures. And then if we turn around, of course, we have the monument for which the sanctuary at Samothrace is most famous today, the Winged Victory, or the Nike of Samothrace, shown here in her own precinct.
So that's just a very short 30-second demonstration of what you can see. But I want to just make it clear that video doesn't do this justice at all. That we have, as I said at the beginning, we have writing, we have photos, and we have this movie that I just showed you. These are all experiences that are happening outside of us. They're things that were outside of our brain. In a way, these experiences are new. This is not something that we do every day. These immersive experiences tap into different parts of our body. They tap into our auditory cortex, our visual system, spatial system, and they're also social. And it does this in a way that is a new form of communication, as Erin said. And because this starts to make you feel like you're there then. Not there now, there then. And I don't know of another medium that allows you to do that. And so I would challenge all of us to think about this as a new way to tell story, a new way to communicate about our sites, and a new way to communicate and preserve our history. So with that, I just want to thank everybody who's been involved in this, in particular the wonderful collaboration with the team at Emory and Bonna here, also the support from CASE. Thank you very much. I also have the honor of introducing the next speaker, which is Dr. Maggie Popkin, who's going to talk about some of this embodied feeling from Samothrace.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you to everybody for being here this evening. It's so lovely to see everybody. I'm really honored to follow these two talks, and I hope to expand a bit on what my colleagues have spoken about. Okay. So as you know now from Bonna and Ian, if you didn't already, the Sanctuary of the Great Gods at Samothrace holds a special place in Greek history as the site of one of the ancient Mediterranean's most important mystery cults and as a crucible of innovation in Hellenistic architecture. The sanctuary's marble architecture, including the rotunda of Arsinoe, which you see here, the Huron, the Hall of Choral Dancers, as well, of course, as the spectacular Nike of Samothrace, these have long dominated archaeological interest in the site. However, as it has become increasingly apparent to the team of the American Excavation Samothrace, the landscape and people's kinesthetic experience of it were fundamental players in the sacredness of the site. You've heard from my colleagues at Emory and the American School about the process and results of digitally modeling the Sanctuary of the Great Gods, and from my colleagues at Case Western Reserve about the process of translating this three-dimensional modeling into mixed reality. Again, as Mark and Erin explained, mixed reality is an emerging technology similar to virtual reality, which superimposes 3D digital content onto the physical world using a headset that projects these digital images directly onto the wearer's eyes, while still letting us see our surroundings and the other people with us. In this presentation, I'd like to discuss the affordances of this mixed reality model. That is, the opportunities for thinking in new ways about how people in the past, and we today, understand and interact with this sacred site. So before going further, I do want to reiterate what Mark said and offer the caveat that it's really difficult to describe in words and still images, or even in videos, what it's like to be in the model. I hope that the photographs, and I'll kind of walk you through them, will give you some sense, but if you're able to join us for the demonstration portions of the symposium, I really hope you will take advantage of this opportunity to come and see for yourselves and move through, for yourselves through the model and experience what it's like in person. But in any event, here, as Mark mentioned, this is sort of what it looks like from the outside when you're seeing other people be in the Samothrace model. To any observer who's not wearing a mixed reality headset, you just see a bunch of people standing around with funny looking devices on their heads. We didn't have the fashion sunglasses here yet. So you're seeing here just me with some of my undergraduate students at Case Western Reserve's library, in this case wearing Microsoft HoloLens headsets. As you saw, though, what my students and I are seeing is something more like this, right? We're still just in a room. We've left the modern carpet in this photo so you can get a sense that we are still in the present in just a regular room. But from my students and my perspectives, and in ways that I'll touch upon later in terms of how our brain is perceiving things, we're at Samothrace. Here, undergraduate students and I are standing just to the east of the Central Ravine, and we're looking across, I don't know if I have a pointer here, at areas of dining rooms, and then you can see the sanctuary's stoa lit by the rising sun visible atop the western hill. We can see the reconstructed sanctuary around us, we can move through it, we can see each other, but again, there's nothing material actually there, right? There's just light projected on our eyes by, in this case, the HoloLens headsets. Here I am with some of my graduate students in the area of the theatral circle. This is the area where visitors to the sanctuary would gather for preliminary rites of initiation before descending to the main buildings of initiation in the central sanctuary. Now, as you can see in this photograph at your left, the theatral circle is a circular area ringed by stepped platforms. You can see them here. That originally would have been populated by bronze statues, only very small remnants of which survive in the archaeological record. In the digital model, we have put placeholders in for these bronze statues, as you can see in this screenshot from one of the digital animations. In the mixed reality model, you find yourself surrounded by these life-size statues, and you can feel viscerally the sense of being watched that surely accompanied many people's experience of this area of the sanctuary. You can also see the massive columns. You can just kind of catch a glimpse of them here, of the dedication of Philip III and Alexander IV. And I think you can just see it peeking out in the background there, the roof of the rotunda of Arsinoe rising from the central sanctuary. In other parts of the model, in some versions of it, and I think one thing to note here, as Mark said, the mixed reality model is a flexible tool that can go in different headsets, different hardware, and you can optimize it in different ways depending on your audience. So at some points in the model, we've allowed it to be able to sort of change elevation, for example, so that you feel as the model moves in front of your eyes, so that you feel as though you're walking up through the theater, for example, to arrive at the Nikkei precinct. I'm going to show you a very short video clip of colleagues of mine testing a very early version of this app. Let me see if this works.
Just keep walking.
You can ignore the sound. But you can see, right, that there's nothing around them to walk on. But their instinct, right, is still to kind of move their legs as though they're walking up steps, because their reaction to seeing these steps right at scale with their bodies is so visceral, so instinctual, that they can't help but move their legs in this way. At the top of the theater, once you quote unquote walk up there, you can turn around to have this extraordinary view over the sanctuary in one direction, while in the other direction, the Nikkei soars above you, as she would have in antiquity. Now, the mixed reality model of the Samothracian sanctuary provides an important tool for understanding the site in a new way. The visual and media studies scholar Victoria Szabo has written about the difference between comprehending and apprehending the past. In her comprehension model of learning, a person, and I'm quoting here, comprehends the significance of a site or object as part of a historical phenomenon, or as an exemplar of aesthetic or technical achievement, end quote. Now, those of us who are scholars are very familiar with this approach, very comfortable with it, whether it be in academic papers, museum wall labels, or the signs at Samothrace that guide visitors around the site today. But Szabo argues that extended reality technologies make possible what she calls an apprehension model for learning. This is a model that entails visceral prehension, a sort of mental and physical grasping of the past that makes it more immediately present in our lives today. The mixed reality model that we've developed combines comprehension and apprehension, combines intellectual and affective experience. It's a model that conveys information about the buildings and landscape of Samothrace and our interpretation of them, but it conveys that information with affect, that is, with kinesthesia, with emotion, and with shared experience with other individuals. Having used the mixed reality model now with students and colleagues on multiple occasions, and I was very happy today with the staff of the American School who've been so helpful for the symposium, I'm offering here several observations about its impact. So one thing I found really interesting when I've gone through the model with students is how many of them comment on how urban the sanctuary feels. When we encounter archaeological sites today through plans or photos, or even frankly, often through on-visit sites of ruins that survive mostly at the level of the foundations, ancient religious sites can often feel fairly empty. We can start to imagine their architectural density from the digital reconstruction that I'm showing you here. But in the mixed reality model, it's really striking how close the structures at Samothrace are together, for example, in the central sanctuary, and it's really striking how tall they are. The seemingly small physical act of having to crane one's neck to see the pediment of the Huron or the top, the roof of the rotunda, these movements of our bodies cognitively reinforce the height of these structures. You feel a sense of being, almost in a city of kind of ancient pseudo-skyscrapers rather than wandering through the more open fields of the archaeological site. And these feelings, right, of magnitude, of height, of density, so really I'm talking about feelings of scale. These are feelings that depend for humans on our relationship to our environment. We're pretty egotistical in our perception of scale, right? We think about size in relation to our own bodies. And the mixed reality model allows us to experience scale precisely in relationship to those bodies. So put another way, we can start to think about the scale, the density, the topographical relations of various elements to one another of the sanctuary with our bodies and our minds, not just the latter. And indeed, and this kind of develops some of the ideas that Mark and Erin touched on at the end of their talk, mixed reality technology offers several, I think, really significant and interesting cognitive affordances. So scholars of so-called 4E cognition, so that's extended, embodied, enactive, and embedded cognition, I'll get to them in a second, have proposed various theories about how cognition extends beyond the brain and even beyond the human body. So embodied cognition, for example, is the idea that our physical bodies and the way our bodies interact with our environment have cognitive agency. They participate in, they even constitute cognition, how we're perceiving and thinking about our world. And although embodiment and other types of 4E cognition are theoretically separate, in reality, they're really hard to disentangle, right? Our bodies are embedded in the environment that we interact with. We often use external objects and structures to interact with our environment, whether it be a walking cane or a mixed reality headset. And these external objects extend our cognitive processes beyond our flesh and blood bodies. We interact with our environments by enacting various skills and processes that we've learned. And really, moving our bodies through space, using various devices, is a fundamental way that humans understand the world. The resulting sensoromotor perceptions not only provide stimuli to our brain, but also fundamentally affect how our brains seek out information and what we experience as true, as real. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not claiming, I don't want to claim that we are cognitively experiencing the sanctuary of the great gods in mixed reality in the same way that an ancient person did. Mixed reality offers us a really exciting way to synthesize, present, and engage with archaeological data. But it's not a precise or identical translation. So for example, the very materiality of Samothrace's architecture and monuments don't translate to mixed reality. So in the mixed reality model, you can't rest a clipboard on a block of marble like Bonna is doing it here. If you tried to do that, it would just drop to the ground. As Lambros Malafouras and other proponents of material engagement theory have argued, new technologies and new kinds of artifacts, of objects, change cognition. They change how we materially interact with and think about and understand our world. Mixed reality allows us to think about digital reconstructions of the sanctuary, about what archaeologists know about the sanctuary's ancient appearance. It allows us to think about these questions with and through our bodies. We can study the ancient sanctuary in a cognitively embodied, embedded, extended, and enactive manner, rather than through representations and reconstructions that we perceive statically. So, right, like we're sitting in the chair watching something happen on a screen or in a book in front of us, and that we then take those still images and visually translate them into mental representations. At the same time, mixed reality allows us to have that embodied cognitive experience with other people. So to re-enliven the sacred space as a setting for conversations and social interactions, as a space in which multiple bodies move together and have to be aware of and accommodate one another. If you come to the demonstration, you'll see that you'll be paying attention to where other people are so you don't run into them, and you'll be talking to them. It will be a truly social experience. So our cognitive experience of the site can be socially embedded in mixed reality in a way that has the potential not to replicate, but I think to illuminate the way sacred spaces were experienced by groups of people, which is so often how sacred spaces were experienced in the ancient Greek Mediterranean. Mixed reality models, and I also want to be clear about this, I don't think that they're a substitute for the archaeological site on Samothrace. Being in the model is not the same as being on site. You don't have the physical sense of journey. For those who've been to Samothrace, you know it's not the easiest to get to necessarily. You don't have any goats in the model yet. insects or snakes. You don't have the heat of the sun, the force of the wind, the texture of the rocky ground, or blocks of marble. I could go on. But conversely, being at the site is not the same as being in the model. On site, you cannot see the elevations of the buildings. You can't see the Nike. We all know she's in Paris today. You can't see the colors of paint on the stoa. You can't see the bronze statues on their bases. So what I want to emphasize is that these are two different modes of experiencing an ancient sacred space that itself no longer exists. Visiting Samothrace in person and visiting it virtually both have important roles to play as we seek to enliven ancient spaces. It's not a question of the Samothrace mixed reality model being the next best thing to going to Samothrace in person, because that question assumes that mixed reality is a replacement or an imitation or even a copy of Samothrace in person. Instead, the real question, to my mind, is how, and the real benefit, I think, is how the Samothrace mixed reality model allows us to experience and think about the sacred sanctuary in ways that complement but actually are not achievable only through in-person visits to the site. When we seek to study the Samothracian sanctuary of the Hellenistic or the Roman or even the Byzantine periods, we're really seeking to time travel, to transport ourselves to a sanctuary that is for us ultimately inaccessible, because the sanctuary we have today, right, is not the sanctuary of the past, it's the sanctuary of the present. Lambros Malafouras, who I mentioned earlier, has argued that the fundamental question we should ask as sort of cognitive archaeologists, if we think of ourselves that way, is, quote, how and where does the mind do its thinking, end quote. In mixed reality, we can think about Samothrace anywhere in the world that we have a headset, but we can do so in a remarkably embodied manner that offers a glimpse of the social and emotional impact of the sanctuary, its topography, and its architecture. So in short, for me, mixed reality opens up a new world of Samothrace, one that we haven't seen before, and one that I suspect we will be exploring and asking questions with for years to come. Thank you. And now I have the honor, and okay, I see somebody's changing the slides, excellent. I'm really pleased now to introduce my colleague, Justine Howe of Case Western Reserve University, who's going to be delivering the final talk of this evening on accessing remote sacred sites, extended reality, and new religious experiences. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maggie, and I'm really excited to be here with all of you. I'll be taking us in a slightly different direction. As you'll see, I'm a scholar of contemporary Islam, and I will be talking about a site very much still in existence, ancient site, and also still a site that very much is used today by religious practitioners, so Mecca and the performance of the Hajj. And I will be talking about the role or the way that extended reality technologies are shaping modern religious experience. So, and in particular, the way that these technologies are expanding access to what remains a fairly inaccessible sacred site. And so one of the main promises of extended reality technologies for practitioners is the way in which they enable people to experience in a different way, in a kinesthetic way, places that are difficult to reach in person. At the same time, extended reality experiences of sacred sites, such as Mecca, are open to users who may not identify with or belong to the religious community that historically and today consider that place to be sacred. So the increased accessibility afforded through these technologies can raise questions about our connection to ancient sites, and also, I believe, demonstrate a broader shift to individualized ephemeral experiences over communal religious practices whose power derives in part on a higher barrier of entry and a difficulty in accessing them. So the extended reality technologies of today promise the expansion of access to sites that are hard to reach, which Mecca still falls into that category, due to time, geographic distance, resource constraints, destruction or decay, restrictions on who can visit the site, and major world events such as pandemic or war. Until the advent of modern air travel, the Hajj was inaccessible to the vast majority of Muslims. And while the Hajj is typically understood to be one of the 5 pillars of Islam, that is a core ritual incumbent on all Muslims to undertake if they are able to, the ritual, even today, is performed by a very small number of Muslims due to the expense and time that it takes to perform it. And this is part of why becoming a Haji, someone who has completed the Hajj, is in fact accords a place of honor and status within Muslim communities. So roughly 3 million Muslims each year undertake the Hajj in its specific time when it takes place. Nearly 11 million complete the Umrah or lesser pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina outside of that month. And this, of course, is an extremely small proportion of Muslims actually undertaking it. It's always been considered a perilous journey, a difficult journey. And so, in other words, this ritual has always had and remains a sort of high barrier to entry, despite serving as an aspirational ritual for Muslims to achieve and a symbol of Muslim unity. So technology over the last 2 decades has opened up the Hajj in a number of ways. It's a prominent topic for topic and area of online Islamic experiences, from sort of online guided tours, online chat rooms, a whole variety of apps and YouTube videos. In the early 2000s, one of the early kind of areas was the development of a Second Life Hajj, so Second Life being the multi-user virtual platform where user avatars could perform requisite rituals through that platform. And so in the more recent technologies that I'll discuss today are designed to, some of them are designed to instruct pilgrims on how to traverse the many sites of the Hajj and the various rituals and movements around the complex, the Masjid al-Haram, in which that and surrounding sites form the ritual cycle of the Hajj. And so in this way, new VR experiences are educational, instructing pilgrims on what to do and when. They augment the advice and guidance now more commonly offered by governments and commercial travel companies that prepare and facilitate pilgrims' experiences of the Hajj through tour packages that are complete with hotel and airfare sort of packages combined. So one example of a model that has been developed for educational purposes, both for Muslims themselves, but also for education for students in university settings in the United States, as well as the wider public, was created by the Center of Islam in the Contemporary World at Shenandoah University. And in this experience, using AI-generated avatars, users walk through the various sites. This is built on the Meta platform. The experience incorporates sound, for example, the recitation of supplications and chants that pilgrims perform. And these are designed to be used to provide both practical and ritual guidance on how to perform the Hajj. So to make the journey more predictable for pilgrims and to facilitate their ritual performances once there. And so you'll see it's about kind of orienting in space. The user experience involves kind of walking through, taking a bus, but then also walking through all these different elements of the ritual cycle. The creators of this tool portray the experience as, quote, an authentic and sophisticated simulation of places, rituals, and various steps involved in Hajj and Umrah, end quote. The term authenticity, which is a structuring concept for much of modern religiosity, reflects the creator's aspirations for religious legitimacy. So in other words, extending previous forms of guidance that might have been in pre-modern manuals and establishing through the reconstruction of the scale, the architectural features, calligraphy, but also through features like sound, the core kind of experience that pilgrims are going to navigate in order to perform the ritual cycle. And so there's certain choices that the creators are making in terms of which features are going to be part of the model and which ones are not. So if you'll notice that in contrast to the photos that I showed of the Masjid al-Haram and its surrounding buildings, none of those feature prominently. They're noticeably absent from this model. So, for example, the new clock tower, the huge luxury hotels are not figured into this particular experience. There are other new XR models that are trying to move beyond the educational or the preparatory elements of these kinds of models to develop a more immersive environment that raises new questions about how extended and virtual reality models are shaping modern religiosity and knowledge of sacred spaces. So creators of these models are trying to do something different, something more akin to actually performing the Hajj. None of them are promising to replace or replicate the Hajj for Muslims, instead offering, quote unquote, a spiritual experience. So these photos are taken from a model that has been developed by the Saudi government in collaboration with technologists there, and they call their experience the Black Stone experience. So it aims, quote, to replicate the sensation of touching the black stone, fostering a spiritual connection that goes beyond physical constraints, end quote. Moreover, the initiative empowers Muslims who are unable to undertake the physical journey to experience the spiritual significance of the Kaaba, end quote. So this particular project was created in 2021 in the wake of the pandemic, so as a way to offer the experience of the Hajj in ways that the vast majority, even fewer Muslims were able to undertake. But as the project has developed, it's clear that as custodians of the most important holy sites of Islam, the Saudi government is now positioning itself to also be the leading player in the virtual Hajj. So this is the Black Stone, which sits in the eastern corner of the Kaaba, the black cube shrine at the center of the Great Mosque. And pilgrims circumambulate the Kaaba twice during two separate occasions during the Hajj, once at the beginning and once at the end. And the idea behind this experience is to enable an actual kind of physical experience. And so seen in this light, the Blackstone experience helps to bridge the kind of the considerable barriers to participation in this aspirational ritual of Muslim unity. So as a ritual built on the concept of universal brotherhood and sisterhood, and on each practitioner's dignity and equality in the eyes of God, such technologies help to realize this ideal of the Ummah. So rather than experience the virtual Hajj as a kind of extension of instructional guides, here these experiences are offering something more analogous to the spiritual benefits of pilgrimage itself. And so as an extended reality experience, this potentially offers users the opportunity to connect with the sacred site of Mecca in an immersive environment that engages the senses in a much more visceral, embodied, and ultimately, possibly meaningful way. I would note that unlike the many texts that extol the tangible benefits of performing Hajj, for example, the purification of sins, the spiritual benefits cast as part of these projects are much more vague, and they tend to invoke concepts that are not specific to the Islamic tradition, things like quote-unquote spiritual connection or experience. And I would suggest that this is because the experiences imagined by these technologists are actually imagine an audience of a kind of consumer pilgrim whose connection to the virtual Hajj is much more individualized than communal, and one that depends on the acquisition of technology rather than formal ritual preparation. The Hajj is an intensely communal experience when performed in person, one in which all practitioners enter into a state of purity for 5 days, don clothing meant to flatten out differences of class and nationality, and to forgo the creature comforts of everyday life. Experiencing the Hajj in mixed, extended, or virtual reality is much more potentially integrated into daily life. Whether or not someone chooses to set apart time and space for engaging with it is completely individual and not at all obligatory. You can choose how long to spend in the experience, which features to focus on, the physical environment around you, etc. You can pause the experience in a way that is not possible in person. And so these technologies, while still in development, I think invite us to ask about the nature of community, religious belonging, and selfhood that are being formed through these technologies, and to what end. So on the one hand, they are removing the high barriers to participation. but it also has the potential to reshape what the Hajj means for Muslims when that experience is mediated through, in this case, the nation state, the state of Saudi state and technologists, and not through religious elites and scholars, for whom the Hajj has traditionally been their preserve. I would also suggest that these extended reality experiences reflect a broader shift toward the commodification of the Hajj and its consumer-driven experience, wherein religious experience is necessarily entwined with consumer culture. And to be clear, the Hajj has always involved commerce, trade, financial considerations. The fact that the Hajj is being shaped by technology in this way reflects the interrelation of religious practice, politics, and the economy that are not unique to the modern era. But I draw our attention to this thread because I think it invites us to ask questions about the relationship between religion and technology that are really profound. Which elements of contemporary Mecca are being emphasized? Which ones are excluded? Which version of the Hajj is the virtual pilgrim undertaking? And who is deciding which aspects to make available and accessible? And so while it is too soon to tell, I expect that there are unexpected, unforeseen consequences of these experiences. I also wanted to raise one point regarding access, and that is the possibility of non-Muslims participating in the Hajj. So the ritual has historically, and is still today, restricted to Muslims only. In the mid-19th century, the British adventurer and writer Sir Richard Burton famously or infamously studied and performed Muslim rituals, underwent circumcision, and donned an elaborate disguise to sneak into Mecca and report back in what would become a best-selling account of the Hajj for European audiences. Gary Bunt, the leading scholar of online Islamic environments and technology, has argued, even before much of the extended reality experiences became part of our everyday lives, that technology has really rendered the need to disguise as a Muslim in relation to the Hajj unnecessary. So technology has already facilitated access to sites and rituals, while certainly known and studied, were considerably more off-limits. So in contrast to the kind of stylized versions that we saw created by universities, media outlets like Al Jazeera, pictured here, have created experiences that are designed to reach non-Muslims and that are also designed to help them to experience elements of the sacred pilgrimage in order to build understanding about Islam, but also to create more nuanced understandings of Mecca as a contemporary metropolis. So you'll see here that the structures surrounding the masjid are much more present, and you can see the number of cranes. And so those are, as you walk through the Al Jazeera experience, users are confronted by these as very prominent features of the Hajj, as well as the more chaotic and unexpected elements of the ritual, namely the crowds and people, their unpredictable movements, features of any large religious gathering or festival. But those features are not as prominent in the previous examples that I raised. So non-Muslims would also be able to access such applications and experiences that are meant to emulate the physical and embodied aspects of the Hajj. One only needs to be a consumer, not a practitioner. And so the availability of the Hajj and the site of Mecca itself raises critical questions about religious belonging and the role of ritual and sacred place in shaping that belonging. If the Hajj is opened up through technologies that remove barriers of access, how does that affect the meanings of the Hajj for Muslims? This ritual has historically served as both an individual journey to become closer to God, a ritual that affirms the aspiration of the Ummah ideal, and a reenactment of the actions of the central prophets, Muhammad, Ibrahim, Ishmael, and others. If the Hajj is no longer just for Muslims, which new meanings arise and which ones are ruptured? The Hajj has always been a diffuse and dynamic practice. Mecca has never existed in some timeless, authentic space. And at the same time, I think it is worth probing the impact of technologies that cater to consumers whose knowledge of and religious experience is mediated through technology, through individual ephemeral experience. So how will these new technologies shape Muslim and non-Muslim understandings of Mecca, and what new entanglements between religion and consumerism do they portend? Thank you.
Thanks so much for everyone for these papers now. We we were planning to have the speakers come up and answer some questions. I know you also do want to be able to actually experience the model that Mark and Erin and Maggie have told you so much about. But let's still have, if we can have maybe 10 minutes of questions, and then we will have some part of the group go down to the Blagan, another part can be here and enjoy the reception or visit the exhibition, and then in about 15 minutes another group can go down to the Blagan. So if the speakers would be willing to come up and join us at the podium here, be great. Thank you. And I can, again, we have Christos here with a microphone for those who might have questions. Fine. If you see that we have people online and we have people in the audience, we usually start with the audience. So if there's anyone in the audience who has a question, oh, Olga does. And Jennifer. Okay. All right.
Well, thank you all very much for these really fascinating insights. I am going to speak as a sculpture expert and ask you if it is possible, when you are reconstructing all this, perhaps you can also show the correct aspect of the victory of Samothrace, which has been incorrectly restored. And we know that one of the wings were not open like we see them today, like a butterfly, but the right wing was actually much closer to the left wing because it was flapping against the left wing by the wind. So maybe it is possible to make a 3D reconstruction of the correct view of the victory. I don't know which one of them to ask.
I can report on this on behalf of our colleague Ludovic Loger at the Louvre. They are in the process of making just such a model that has the wing reconstruction that Marianne Amiot arrived at by examining the fragments of the proper right wing, and so we are really looking forward to that. But it's in process.
Oh, fantastic! Thank you.
We can't hear you.
Just push the red button.
The red button. Okay, now I finally have it. All right. I think that Olga's raising a really important point, though, which is that, and this is a point that Tina was discussing as well, it's really easy for people to see these super realistic looking models and think that they are completely authoritative or right exactly the way that something was. But they are all the result of many, 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 many interpretive decisions. They are subject to debate and disagreement among scholars. And so I think one of the things that we have to think about as we are conducting research with and teaching with and engaging, with the public with these kind of mixed reality and digital models is how we question these notions of authenticity and how we convey debates and ambiguity when you can actually only have, one image in front of your eyes at a time. So we are working on that particular issue, but I appreciate your raising that because what you're seeing, there are other, people might come up with different interpretations and different ways of presenting different data that would look very different. And so these aren't always, they're not exactly the way things were. We don't always know exactly, and it's really important to recognize. So thank you.
Well, okay, I'm going to follow up question on that. Obviously, you reconstruct all the architecture, and you must be very sure of what you're doing, so you have the very realistic or real experience of the architecture. But then again, when you look at the sculpture, there's no head. I mean, that is not the way ancient viewers would have seen this. Also, the color. I mean, don't we know that the wings were blue and things like that? So I just wonder if you can't take it a little farther. I know it's controversial, but she did have a head and arms. We have her fingers, right?
No, they're in our future.
What?
They're in our future. But no, these are good points, and all around. And I think that we try to figure out how to model ambiguity and to signal that these are interpretive decisions.
Right. Well, there's such a contrast between the architecture, which is so finished, and
Yeah.
and I just was wondering in the Cleveland example whether I couldn't really see it very clearly, but whether the Cambodian sculpture, whether you put back his limbs and any other aspects of it, or you just show it as it is in the museum.
No, we actually did both. So we did the best guess reconstruction of what it looked like then, including a different surface, and that was based on some of the other sculptures that were found at the same temple. But we showed it actually both ways, with the complete sculpture and without. If I could just add on to these points, I think this is such a great question, and it's so much more important with this technology. Along with the increased power that this technology has comes increased responsibility, because you do start to really feel like you're there, or at least somewhere, and it gets to such a deeper part of ourselves that we have to pay attention to this as experts.
I'll just say one other thing quickly. It's we wish we could just go in and automatically change things in the model as we wish, but I think one thing to stress is it takes a lot of time and money and physical, there's a lot of labor that goes into making these, and so, I've only seen a glimpse of what, Mark and his colleagues have done for me, have done for us. It is an ongoing process, but it's not something that can happen instantaneously, and we wish we had more time and money always. I'm sure we all feel that way, but this is definitely a challenge to confront as well.
We have Bisra. Do you have the mic? There, great.
So it is a question, I guess, to all of you. In the model on Samothrace, one of the visually, aesthetically disruptive reconstructions is the blocking out of where public sculpture is. How are you thinking of refining this aspect of the model? Because it's visually jarring, and because they actually take a lot of space within the model, that affects the way one aesthetically experiences the site. So I would like to hear about this modeling ambiguity in an aesthetic way.
I can start on that. This is pretty closely related to the question about why the incomplete representation of the Nikkei so far. And in the case of the bronze statues, it's because they were melted down. We don't have any surviving examples. So we had to be very generalized in how we represented those. It's possible, I think, to make something a little bit higher fidelity, a little bit maybe more rounded and higher detail in terms of texture, but until we have more information, I always say that representation implies information. So the more detail that we show on those sculptures, the more detail it seems like we have, and that's just why it hasn't been a push yet.
If I could just say also that having taught the model, despite my lack of expertise in ancient sacred sites, but it's actually one of the most useful parts of those unfinished statues is the fact that it's a jarring experience, and that's a point of discussion with the students about what choices would have been made, what kinds of, right, it actually invites a kind of conversation that you might not have in terms of what these questions are on evidence. It provides a really visceral kind of way into that conversation that is often, I think, hard for undergraduate students in particular, to enter into.
And one last point I think I can make is the uncanny valley. Architecture is fairly easy to model because of its rectilinearity, but sculpture, if you get close and you're not close enough, it looks awful. So we backed away from several attempts at proximity to have just the silhouettes.
Well, I'm just offering it as an inspiration, as something to, rather than trying to model it exactly how it would look, because you don't have the evidence for that. To me, that's the moment where creative license can be taken. Speaking about modeling ambiguity, I don't have the answers for that, but I think this is a moment in which one has to move away from we don't have it and therefore we cannot represent it in terms of what visually could work with the imagination. We don't have the answers for it yet, as I'm saying. I just don't think it's the straight line that was in the answer.
Well, I think I'm really enjoying these provocative questions. I think, though, Bissara, this goes back to the question, right, of which is going to be, everybody would answer this differently, of what the point of the model is that you're making. And one answer could be to convey information, right, about the archaeological information that we have. And then another answer could involve this more, right, trying to imagine what we don't have. Right, and this would shape the decisions that you make that result in whatever the final model is. So I think, there's people here who conduct their own excavations and projects, and I think as you embrace digital technologies in different ways, it's always has to be guided by your goal, and there's going to be, compromises and decisions, and one could, I think, end up actually, again, with unlimited resources, ideally we might have multiple different models of the site that answer different questions. We're not there, I don't think we're there yet, but maybe one day.
Okay.
If I could just add, the other party to add there is the audience. So I think it depends on who you're talking to. I think different models for different people.
Okay. I see John Papadopoulos had his hand up, and then Vasily, and then probably we should grab a few online.
Okay.
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. Back in the antediluvian period, we did a UCLA Getty model of the Forum of Trajan using a silicon graphics engine, which at the time cost about $250,000. And now you could probably buy for $2.50. And one of the great things about this was that beyond the consumerism, and we did it for a museum exhibition where we actually got sculpture from Rome to have there, and the virtual reality model was playing. So this is in the mid-90s. One of the great things is the scholarly uses of this, and it just really goes to the point that Olga was making, that you can actually use this because we're two-dimensional archaeologists working in a three-dimensional medium. And Diane Favreau, for example, was one of the consultants, and she had all sorts of disagreements with James Packer's reconstruction. So she did alternatives to the model that she got Bill Jepson to build. And we all learned so much to the point that Jim Packer never published that, but he wrote a 90-page article, never published, about all the mistakes I made in the reconstruction that the virtual reality model showed me. And so it is a wonderful scholarly tool as well, and we should never forget about that.
And it can be a wonderful teaching tool as well. We've had the opportunity to not only teach with the model, but to have students try to make their own, and they realize very quickly how hard it is and how many decisions you have to make and how many mistakes you can make. So that's been really fun.
Okay, we have Julia and Vasily, and then we'll do a few online, and then. Yeah.
So I want to follow up on something that.
Turn it on, Julia.
Earlier, it's also provoked by this picture. It's provoked by what John just said. Maggie, when you were responding to Jennifer and to Olga, you emphasized that it takes time, it takes money. Al Jazeera has money. The Saudi state has money. How do we keep this technology from being, rather than something useful, something constructive, something that advances scholarship, how do we keep it from turning into something that's yet another division into the haves and the have-nots? The archaeological expeditions, the archaeological projects that don't have access to millions and millions of dollars. How do we keep it from turning into yet another access issue?
Yeah, do you want to? I would like to be clear that we don't have millions of dollars. I wish, but it's such a good question. Yeah. I don't know that there's an easy answer. I do think that teaching, whether or not they have access to all of this technology, teaching students to think critically about these kind of questions, because people today, they're growing up surrounded by this kind of extended reality technology. It's a part of my children's life. They don't think about it, right, in the way that I've had to learning something new. So I think one answer is to actually, and this is a plug for the humanities, to have students read and write about and use these technologies and actually think about these questions so that they're not just consuming representations, right, like this from Al Jazeera, unthinkingly, thinking like this is something, unbiased, it's kind of like, it feels so true, but that they're actually thinking about these questions of who's making it, for what audience, with what agenda, who can have access to it. That's that doesn't solve the problem, but I think that kind of education that humanities scholars have to really be sure that we're doing is important.
I would like to take a slightly different bent too. I do think the direct answer to your question is that these kind of technologies are getting cheaper, and I think that they are going to allow access to groups that never could before. And I'd like to give 2 examples. I carry around, I have a newer iPhone, but everybody who has an iPhone 12 and beyond carries a 3D laser scanner with them. And there's an application, if you have one of these phones, I would encourage you to download an app called Polycam. You can run it for free. This does a 3D laser scan in your pocket, and it's the quality that would have been a $100,000 piece of equipment just a few years ago. And it's in your pocket and free to use on a software basis. So this is the kind of thing that does allow access to places and groups that didn't have it before. All of the headsets are primarily being used for gaming, and so all those kids that are wasting their brain not doing humanities work are making it easier for the rest of us to do this kind of work. So the kinds of headsets that we're using in the exhibit are under $1,000. The HoloLens, when it started, was $5,000. So already that price is coming down. There are headsets that you can get for $250 today that are pretty good. So all of that is marching in the direction of this technology being more and more accessible. But the other side of access that I wanted to bring in here is the potential, even though it's not a perfect replica, but as both Maggie and Tina talked about, this does give you the ability to get close to visiting places that many of us, and many of our students in particular, would never have access to. And I would never be able to go to the Hajj, but I can go feel like it. It's not perfect, but it's at least some sort of experience. And I think our students, I know, I'll just tell my personal experience of doing the Krishna exhibit. I know every millimeter of that cave in Cambodia. It's very far away from anywhere that a tourist would normally go. I am counting the days till I get to go there in 2027 to go feel that place, to feel the wall that I know deep down in my body. I will be able to walk into that and feel like I'm in a place that I know very well. And I never would want to get on an airplane and go to this remote part of Cambodia to go to an old dirty cave, other than having had this very intense experience with this sculpture. And so I think that it has provided me the access to feel like what it's there, and it has also inspired me to want to go. And I see this in our students and the people that want to do this. And I hope that that's the kind of access that we can take from this kind of technology.
Oh, thanks, Morgan. Let's let Vasily have the last question on the floor.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I will make a small observation about who controls this technology today. And I think the gaming technology has given us so many tools, and there's so many open access tools that even people with, limited budget as we are, we can create this kind of immersive technologies. However, my observation is not a question, it's an observation more, is that, if we did the same symposium, the same discussion 5 to 10 years before, I mean, we wouldn't discuss about immersion. We would discuss about visual accuracy or how good is the model or how visually appealing is the model or how photorealistic it is. And I found it very interesting that in all the lectures today, we discussed about the presence and the immersion and something that shows, I don't know if, I mean, it's a change in mentality or it's a change that the archaeologists are more involved in the process of creating the model, but I found it really interesting. So hopefully the lectures today and ours also will discuss this and will bring up this matter, which I think it's more important than actually visual accuracy today. Thank you.
Thank you. And so, Maggie, are there still one to two questions online? And
do I have the questions online? Okay. I can try to read them out loud. Hold on, there's some just thank yous. Okay, there is a question about the relationship between material culture and context. The Cleveland Krishna is put back into its context, whereas the modern site is subtracted in Samothrace. Oh, he says, actually, I have addressed his question, so never mind. We do have one question.
Okay, let's just do one, because we do want people to be able to...
There's an actual question. Will the technology and the videos be made available at some point to the visitors of the sanctuary at Samothrace?
Well, we can report that the Samothrace Archaeological Museum has reopened this summer with all new displays that do include animations through the model, so that when the visitors come, they can see that in the museum and then proceed out to the site.
Yes.
Okay. I would say at this point we should conclude our session here. And we will have opportunity to walk down to the Blagan lower level, follow the route that's on your map. For those of you who, we can have about 15 people go now, and then 15 people have a glass of wine. When you finish your glass of wine, you head down and come back, and we will also have 2 sessions tomorrow. So looking forward to seeing you tomorrow as well as at our reception.